I think they try their best on airplanes, but you and I have both been just reading up on some science here. There's an actual reason that food tastes differently at 30,000 feet.
There was that interesting BBC article which was talking about a study. So this study was actually commissioned by Lufthansa, the German airline, and they got the Fraunhofer Institute for Building Physics. I have no idea if they do good studies. However, they commissioned this study, and what they discovered is that while you're on a plane, the nature of a plane environment changes how you perceive salt and sugar. And part of it is going to be because the pressurized environment, part of it's going to be how dry it is. Regular humidity, our restaurants, they can be 60%. They can be 75% during the spring. I know because the dehumidifier is running constantly. But a plane can be about 12% humidity. And it's interesting, so much of how you taste food actually comes through your nose. It actually comes through the smell. And if it's dry, your nose dries out, and that doesn't allow you to taste as much of the food. Therefore, they have to really ramp up the salt. They have to really ramp up the spices to try to make the food taste as good as it would have tasted if you weren't in that airplane environment.
Well, they have to do all of that, which would require an awful lot of testing, but they also, by law, have to cook the meal on the ground. They then freeze it or supercool it or something, and then they can't use a microwave on an airplane. It's not that simple.
Yeah, they don't have galley kitchens on a plane, which, so despite my respect for how much work that must be, is one of the reasons I don't need to eat it, because I'm going to a place, presumably a place I wanted to go. So I don't need to eat reheated food. I want to eat fresh local food.
All right. I want you to define a word because then it leads into another portion of this discussion about dining on an airplane or why not to. What does the term umami mean?
So umami is sort of defined as that extra taste, and it's sort of the savoriness of it, the idea that there's something in flavor that's more than maybe the components of those things, something that sort of kicks in your brain and you go, man, this is just really good. Umami. It's sort of hard to define what it is, but when you taste it, the way that soy sauce is, yes, it's salty, but there's a richness to it. Fish sauce has a richness to it that you can't quite define. So that's sort of created by it. MSG is one of the things that helps create umami. By the way, if you're afraid of MSG, that doesn't really make sense to me. MSG is a naturally occurring compound. The fact that people use it in food, good for them. It makes your food taste better.
The reason I ask is because another article, Travel and Leisure, looked at this aspect of food on an airplane and how our senses, even sound around us, can affect how we enjoy food. And they said that umami is not as negatively affected as some of your other senses, your taste buds, your nose, those things on an airplane. And therefore, they say that's why the Bloody Mary is a good drink on an airplane.
Yeah, so this is according to Cornell, which obviously is a good institution. It does have a hospitality school, so they're, highly interested in this. But yeah, so according to Cornell, there's a combination of the airplane environment and then also the noise on an airplane, which is very interesting to me. But according to them, we saw this article in Travel and Leisure, it's that the Bloody Mary is the best tasting when you're on an airplane that it will ever be, and better tasting than other things because the environment lowers your ability to perceive the sugar in a tomato. And tomatoes, you might think of them as not being sweet, but they are. They have a lot of sugar. It lowers your perception of the sugar, but not your perception of the umami. Therefore, the umami flavor comes out more strongly. Therefore, the very best airplane drink you can have, apparently, is a Bloody Mary.
Second to the one that you described at the beginning of the show, where you take a little bottle of airline tequila and put it into ginger ale.
Although now I might have a Bloody Mary when I go. However, I don't generally think drinking soup is my favorite way to enjoy my day.
All right.
So I'm not generally a Bloody Mary person, but there is one thing about this study. It had nothing to do with traveling, but I found it interesting. When they were saying that the noise helps it taste better for you, I thought maybe this is why every restaurant plays the music so loud. And it's to cover up for not very good cooking.
I don't mind loud music at a bar. I don't like it so much at a restaurant. The music's you said something about loud music at your restaurant earlier, but you really don't have it that loud. What's the worst meal if you've ever eaten on a plane? What's the worst thing you've had?
Well, the worst time is definitely when I got sick eating on a plane, which has certainly influenced my desire not to do it. But probably, I did not know that I was flying on what is basically a Spirit or Frontier. I was flying Hawaii to Australia. I didn't realize I was flying on this low budget airline, and I actually had gotten delayed. And so I hadn't eaten like this entire time. And I think, well, at least I'll get to eat on the plane. I'm just so hungry. And I didn't realize this low budget airline doesn't have food. And so the worst meal I've ever had was not getting one because I didn't know you had to pre-book a meal. But the story turned around. A woman sitting next to me had actually forgotten she had bought food and then had also packed food for her and her small kid. So her small kid's lunchbox is the meal that I ended up eating between Honolulu and Sydney, which was not terrible in terms of food. I just had that pit in my stomach that I was eating. I was literally taking this candy away from this small child and literally eating their lunch. And I still feel appreciative to that woman and slightly guilty for eating her son's food.
All right. Be brave, be experimental when you travel. I think you'll thank yourself for it. And if every once in a while you get sick, Tanner says it's worth it.
The amount of good meals I've had pales in comparison to the number of times I've gotten sick. And eating abroad is one of the biggest reasons to travel. Don't let your fear dissuade you.
That's Flavor Files. I'm Jerry Agar. He's Tanner Agar. Thanks a lot.